Alright, I just wanted to make this video for anybody that has a 2001 to 2005 Honda Civic with the D17 in it. So basically, this guy that I know, he asked me if I could do the timing belt and fix a leak behind the block on this car. I already finished up with the timing belt. As you can see, I put a brand new timing belt on it. It's all in time. But the leak behind the block, I thought it would be something simple. So if you have a leak behind the block, then it's very likely that this could be your problem, just like what the problem was on this one. I thought it was going to be like a simple rubber hose back there, but it turned out it wasn't. And the way the intake manifold is designed on these, there's no room. Like, even if you're under the car, or on top of the car, like, it doesn't matter where you're at. It's really hard to access, and you can't see it, you can't get to it. The only way I was able to get to it and fix this one is by taking the intake manifold off. But even though the intake manifold, it may seem like it's a really big job, and it is kind of a big job, but honestly, it's not as hard as it seems. You know, a lot of people don't really share many tips on this, so I'm hoping I can make your life a little bit easier. So when I got the intake off, you see this, there's this coolant tube right here, and it runs back. It's where your water pump gets its feed. There was a pinhole in it right here, and that's where it was leaking. So for the sake of time, so we can get this car back on the road, what we did was, I had a buddy of mine come, and under this, he put a weld on there. He welded it up, and it seemed like for the most part, it got it pretty sealed. So I just took some of this putty, and it's hardened now, it's cured, but I put it on top of it just to make sure it's not gonna leak. It's water resistant, but and the car's already filled with coolant and everything like that, so it's sealed up fine. I know this isn't everybody's fix, but regardless, that's just what I'm just letting you know. That's where it's very likely your leak could be coming from, if it's coming from above the oil filter or anywhere behind the block where you can't get to it. Like I said, there's no way we could have ever found out or found where the leak is or fixed the leak without removing this intake manifold. But what I want to show you on the intake manifold is, because there are, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah, five nuts and bolts. So it's two bolts and 3 nuts to remove the intake manifold. But there's, I believe it's either 7 or 8 total that are on the manifold, and I'm hoping this can help you and save a lot of time and don't make the same mistake that I did, because I'm going to show you here on the intake manifold that all of these aren't necessary to get the intake off. I will show you that, because I had all the ones I needed out, but I was still trying to get the rest of them out because I thought I had to take them out to get the intake off. And I'm going to show you on the intake right now why that's not the case. Here's our intake manifold. If you can see this, if I can get it to pop out. Oh, I got that threaded in there. Hold on. Alright, you can see this is a spacer that goes in between the manifold and the mating surface. And as you can see, it's got one of its own studs on there, and then it's got threads. Like, let me show you here. You see how these have holes to where they thread into the head? This has threads in it on both of this, and this one has a stud in it. So this will be, your manifold will be like this. This will be the bottom two. The second one from the left and the second one from the right. You don't have to remove them to actually take the intake manifold off of the car, well, off of the engine. You can remove them whenever you have the manifold off to replace these rubber O-ring gaskets that are in there. So I made the mistake, which these are the 2 hardest ones to get to out of all of them, and they're the 2 that you don't even have to take off the intake manifold. And this one, if yours is like mine, this bolt actually, it doesn't come out of the intake. There's no room for it to come out. So you're best off to, like I said, remove the intake manifold, and then once you have the manifold off, if you want to change the gaskets, remove this from this spacer, because if you're fighting to try to get this bolt out or try to get this nut off while it's in the car, you have a good chance at stripping that out, and then you can't even replace it because there's no space for it to come out, if you see what I'm saying. So yeah, basically I hope that helps you guys. It makes the job a little bit easier, because all the top ones, once you have the fuel rail and everything off, they're easy to access, and for the most part these side ones are pretty easy to access, and then there's a hole where you can kind of reach this middle one, and it's honestly not too bad, but these two are really the biggest issue. So I hope that helps you guys. I hope that makes this job a little bit easier. I'm gonna go back to the car, and I am going to show you a couple things that you might want to replace while you're back there, and some things that might make the job a little bit easier. Because if you're working on a car like this one, where this intake manifold has never been off since, you know, probably the car was built, I had some trouble with right here. There's a rubber hose. I got it loosened now, but it was seized onto the manifold, and since the manifold's plastic, you don't really want to try to like pry or with a screwdriver or try to pop this off, because it's seized on there and you can risk breaking the plastic intake manifold, and that's the last thing you want to do. So what I did was I just cut this while it was onto the intake manifold. I just cut it off to make it easier to get the manifold out, and now that you have the manifold out, it's a lot easier to get to this, and you can just pop it off and replace the hose. So a lot of these hoses, they're cheap to replace. You might as well just go ahead and replace them now while you're in there. It'll make the job a lot easier the next time you have to deal with it, or the next time someone has to take it apart. As well as there is this, I have it zip tied up right now because I took it off. There is a 1-bolt knock sensor that goes right here under the intake manifold. And again, there's no way you could ever get to this or replace it without removing this intake. So I would suggest that you replace that knock sensor while you're in there. I mean, you might as well, because if you put it back together and you end up having a problem 10,000 miles later, you're gonna wish you would have replaced it. But yeah, other than that, the job is really not that bad once you know that you don't have to fight with those 2 bottom bolts on the intake manifold. And then one more thing, this was an issue I ran into. There's 2 brackets that bolt underneath the intake manifold that hold them on. I think there's 3 nuts that hold them. There's like 2 studs here, and then there's 1 over here. If you just take off those nuts, you won't be able to take off the intake, because it's just the way it's designed. There's no room. The brackets that the intake bolts to, like the studs, they're bolted down here to the block on both sides. What you're gonna have to do is remove those nuts that bolt the bracket to the intake, and then you're gonna have to remove the bracket from the block and just take it off completely before you can remove the intake manifold. And honestly, I've had this same problem before on other Honda Civics, and it's really not even a necessary bracket. It's really honestly kind of pointless, because like I said, it bolts to the intake and it bolts to the block. So I mean, I guess you could call it a support for the intake, but I mean, it'd be a little bit different if like it was bolted to the firewall and it held the intake, so like the engine didn't move too much, but it's bolted directly to the engine, so it's really not making any difference. And these bolts and these studs are plenty enough to hold the intake onto the engine. I mean, you can put it back on there if you want to, but I mean, I was honestly fighting with it, and it's just, you have to get under the car. It's just annoying, it's dirty, and it's really unnecessary. But yeah, those are some tips for if you're doing the intake manifold on one of these D17s. Believe me, it might sound like little stuff, dumb stuff, but if I would have known this going into it, it probably would have cut the time I was working on this car in half, because again, I was fighting with those two bolts back there thinking I had to remove them, and I didn't even have to take them out. So I hope this helps, and leave a comment if you guys run into any other issues, or if you have any other questions about something that you ran into on working on one of these or doing this job. I'll try my best to reply to you as soon as possible and let you know how to solve the problem. All right, guys, thanks.